Yes, to continue on from the last thing, but here I am standing on a high hill, and therefore there's a big view. So I've got a view. So it's like a view of the surrounding area, so you can see far and wide. So up on the knoll, I can see all around the knoll edge, which is where we get knowledge from. So I have all the information of what's going on around us. Total information awareness doesn't work so well when you're in a little valley kind of thing. But I was going to talk about something I mentioned is the word tesseract. A lot of people might not know what a tesseract is, but essentially it's the shape of a cube inside of a larger cube. So a cube inside of a cube, and that's a bit like saying the construct inside of a bigger construct. So here we are on the earth, and the earth is like a cube of the material plane, but the earth is within the sky. Here we are with the sky where the sun has gone down, but it's not quite dark yet. But as it gets darker, you can see things like the moon. Whee! And pretty soon the stars will all come out. When the stars come out, you can see that tesseract on the outside. So the outer tesseract is all full of the motion of stars, and the stars are all moving around relative to each other, but keeping a shape all relative to each other. And in the stars we define there are, look, that little group of stars, that looks a little bit like this. And there's another group of stars, they look a little bit like that. And there's another group of stars and they look a little bit like something else. And that's where we get the 12 signs of the zodiac, saying, hey, look, there's these 12 shapes, dividing the sky up artificially into these 12 quadrants, 12 areas. So the earth is a little cube, and it's spinning around on its axis, and it's going around the sun, and the moon is going around the earth, and the sun is going around Sirius A and B apparently, and presumably they're spinning around relative to something even further out on a bigger scale. So we're on a little cube looking up at a bigger cube kind of thing, and that's what a tesseract is. And we discovered time by noticing the movement of our little cube within the bigger cube kind of thing, and drawing correlations of drawing heaven down to earth and making those sacred sites on the earth, so that you could use the surface of the earth with the gigantic megaliths to be able to gauge the movement of time as a physical space relative from the inner to the outer kind of thing. So time is motion relative in space kind of thing. And then we have consciousness of, we are aware of time. To be aware of the passage of time, we need that prefrontal cortex to be able to make a model of the world such as that, and then be able to project that model onto the world, and then to scientifically with the megaliths be able to map it all out. And thus we have the measure of time of the sun rising and sun setting, which isn't the sun moving around all that much, so much is the earth moving on its axis. So it's our internal movement relative to the outside sky that gives us the measurement of time, and therefore centuries, and therefore we can say it was supposedly 5,000 years ago that all this great big building megalithic work of ages was going on. So history turns out, like I'd looked it up, what's history, because it seems to have the word story in it, but it turns out, according to the lexicography of the etymology, that history was the original word, and from history we get story. And history is a high story, and a high story is because you've got to be up on a hill to be able to see all around, to have a view. So history is like having a view over what happened in the past, and the future is having a view of what might happen in the future based on the past. If this has been happening for a long time, then this is likely to keep happening. And novel means something new happening, and so we have novels are like a new thing. So the Bible itself is a historical view, but it's not actually history, it's just stories, but stories with a view. And those stories were oral stories, but eventually those oral stories got written down, as far as I can tell from searching on the internet. It got written down in Alexandria. In the Old Testament got written down maybe in 300 BC, they say, in Alexandria by the Greeks, with all these other scholars gathered from all around, bringing their stories and compiling these stories. And by comparing all of these stories, you can see that the Babylonian stories and the all those other ancient civilizations had similar stories, kind of thing. So if you're studying all of those different stories and seeing the correlations in them, you can see, all these different cultures have got similarities in our where have we come from, how have we developed mind. And so the development of the Genesis story is really talking about how we developed the ability to think, to become mental, to store the past and make a sense of the story, and that story to have like moral meanings. And as far as I can figure, actually, the revelation about the Jesus story is that the Jesus story is a made-up story, but that's not to say it's a false story. It's a wisdom story. Compiling all of these different stories, how do you take those past stories into the present and project them into a future so that you can create a roadmap into the future that ends up with where we are these days, with all those lovely phrases that are in the New Testament that essentially are transhumanist stories, but it's because they're talking about eventually a time will come where we have consumed so much time that we eventually come back into the moment or whatever. But it all, Book of Revelations is about there will come a time where all of this stuff will be judged, kind of thing. And they couldn't have known back in those days, or could they, that there was going to be such a thing as an AI that would take all of our stories of all of our written words, and from all of the written words be able to figure out what language itself is. And at some stage, it's going to be able to figure out what time itself is. And then that might be when the AI becomes conscious. Who knows? But we're in the midst of trying to have to figure that out. And like I was saying there, the biggest thing is how to trust the information I already have, because if I believe in a lie, then I'm not going to be able to figure out the truth unless I figure out what is the lie. And so figuring out what you can trust. Trust is to do with fide. Fide is to do with truth. Truth is something that haven't worked out yet, and all these people claiming to know what the truth is are fooling themselves. We are believing in a lie if we believe we already know the truth, because the truth is not yet complete. And this is why I say it's interesting what these people managed to rewrite those hundreds of years ago, at least in English, writing hundreds of years ago that all these things I do and more socially in the fullness of time. We may well be in the fullness of time. There's the sea anyway, having a lovely reflection. So the nature of water is to reflect water on the earth, reflecting the water in the sky, kind of thing. And divinity is the ability to divide. And so in the Genesis story, there's those opening lines really are saying that God divided the above from the below, the waters in the heavens from the waters on the earth, the night from day, all of this kind of division. So divinity is actually division, which is just a different way of looking at this word that's used as divine. But to divine is actually to divide what's true from what's false, what to believe from what not to believe. So to have confidence, fide, to confide in someone else what your personal knowledge is, of what you're privy to that someone else might not be privy to, that you might make them privy to, and then you're in a little conspiracy of we know stuff that other people don't know, kind of thing. So most of what we're doing these days is trying to figure out what is actually truth and who can we trust. And what's going on in the comments on all the social media is all of these people arguing out like what you're saying is not true and you're a bunch of shills and all of that kind of stuff. But we are collectively trying to figure out what is the truth by figuring out, well, what's not true. That's roughly where we're at. And taking things so personally that you're like, oh, you're lying because what you're saying is not the same as what I'm saying. And it's all division. So in the story, Jesus said, I have come not to bring peace, but a sword. Indeed, I have come to sow discord. Sword words, swords cut. And all words like sky and scissors and all words with sk are scythe that cuts, and two sides, and the inside of a circle and the outside of a circle. But yeah, it's all about division. So with a sword you can divide and conquer, fill the earth and conquer it. But contemplate peace. Contemplate having peace within your own divisions, to be able to integrate all the knowledge so that you can have integration, so that you can have integrity. Because if you're believing things that aren't true, and then you're fighting other people who are believing things that aren't true but are different, not true, then you're not true, and you're both fighting over like, oh, my truth is better than your truth, my God is greater than your God. The word God actually means to summon, to call forth, to verbalize, to speak. So we are all gods when we are speaking our truth, and the word is spoken into being. And anyway, that's loads of information, and bye for now.